as a producer.
If the great white sharks all sat down and played with each other, the game wouldn't last very long. But if producers show up at the game, then it lasts for a very long period of time.
The poker greats, the wolves, all know a producer, the lambs, when they see one.
Instead, it was the typical case of a wolf having a lamb.
Right.
And we didn't want anybody else to interfere.
Can't say, yeah, I don't want to say who
Don't
was,
say that.
From the moment gambling got a foothold in the U.S. in the early 19th century, the hunt for producers was on.
Well, like a lot of different kinds of gambling, it really started in New Orleans, which was a big entry place for a lot of gambling, because New Orleans had been under the control of the French, and many of these games were French.
Among them, a card game called Poke.
The game was played with a 20-card deck, and 4 people could play, and they were each dealt 5 cards, and then they would bet on their hands. The Americans took over the game, and since their French wasn't very good, they began to call it poker.
Because it was so deceptively simple, poker was the right game in the right place to fleece the right people. The Mississippi River became a poker-playing mecca around the 1820s, when a crop of successful cotton growers, merchants, and tourists traveled on riverboats to and from New Orleans.
You had a lot of tourists there with a lot of money. So many gamblers would flock there to take advantage of the people with money.
And voila, the birth of the riverboat dandy. The dandies became as well known for the suits they wore as the suits they played. It was a fashion statement that said, go ahead, try to take my money. Many tried and failed.
Gamblers would stake anything, their homes, their farms, all of their property, sometimes even the clothes they were wearing. There were notorious stories of people losing everything.
By then, professional gamblers had learned to stay a step ahead of the producers by constantly changing the game.
First, it went to a 52-card deck, which allowed more hand combinations and more people to play. And then to make the game more exciting, they added a second round, which they called a draw.
It would at least encourage you to put more and more money into the pot and chase the person who already had a made hand. That was tremendously inspiring to people whose gambling impulse wanted as much money in the pot as quickly as possible.
The Civil War also played a hand in changing hands. During the war, soldiers started betting to draw more cards that might help them win. Somehow it reminded the men of the stud horses that helped them pull their cannons out of the mud. Stud poker was born. The new games never stopped coming. Omaha 8, 7-card stud, high-low split. Today, Doyle Brunson and his fellow world-class players know them all. Call it self-defense.
They start new games because they try to keep the specialists out of the game. In other words, a guy's a real good hold'em player, he might be a bad 7-card stud player. You know, so you have to be a well-rounded player to be able to set in this company. You can't be some kind of a specialist and play.
Being a well-rounded player served Doyle well in the days when he was going around Texas with Amarillo Slim, Sailor Roberts, and Crandall Addington.
There were producers every place. You could find games any place.
And usually the police, too. Gambling was illegal in Texas in the 50s.
We got arrested a lot, you know, but back in those days it was a misdemeanor. We wouldn't even give them our right name. We would just give them a bogus name, pay a fine, you know, and leave. But money was all there's after, like most things.
To keep the action going, all it took was a little ingenuity.
There were various artifices used by some of the operators of these games to avoid the law. They used membership in fraternal organizations like the Redmen or the Elks. You'd join, and it was just a cover for a big high-stakes poker game.
Still, that didn't mean Doyle and his pals were in the clear. Their big wins could also mean big trouble.
The bad guys would get word where we were playing, and here they'd come with them shotguns and everything.
Been through like 4 or 5 hijackings where they took your money. That was one of the hazards. We played in games where they had machine guns up on top of the roof to protect against the hijackers.
Hijacker just wanted the money. And so the thing to do is let them have the money. You know, it's not worth losing your life over. There'd be another poker game, and if that was the end of your stake, if your word was good, somebody'd stake you in the next poker game.
And despite the cops, the hijackers, there always was a next game, or a new one. Just about this time, Doyle and company started playing something called No Limit Texas Hold'em, alias the chess of poker. It's the game Doyle and his friends are playing right now. In Texas Hold'em, the dealer gives each player 2 cards face down, called the hole cards. He then turns over 3 more cards called the flop, followed by a 6th called the turn, and 7th known as the river.
There are 4 bets in Hold'em. You've got the bet when you get your hole cards, then you've got the bet on the flop, then the turn, then the river. As you play the game, you can develop your strategy.
With all the extra betting making bigger pots, Hold'em became popular. But with so much potential dough at stake, some players, especially producers, prefer to play Hold'em with a limit on the amounts they can bet. Not these guys.
Limit poker is a science, but no limit poker is an art. In limit poker, you're shooting at a target. In no limit poker, the target comes alive and shoots back at you.
By the late 1960s, the Texas road gamblers' mastery of No Limit Hold'em had dried up their invitations to play poker in the state. The sheep had been shorn once too often. But Doyle and his gang would find another flock in virgin territory, 1,400 miles to the west. Here's a great lesson in body language. Keep an eye on Doyle Brunson and his easygoing smile. Chow Jiang starts the betting. 6,000 to stay in.
You'll be sorry.
The other men assess. And fold, fold, fold. Even the great Chip Reese is out. Only Doyle stays in. Watch him make some casual conversation.
You can have the profit if you want it.
Chow bets 4,000. His face is tense. But not Doyle's. The old master is all smiles.
I was in shape too. I had 2 to look at. They were both bad.
Chow needs a card too, and then he follows up by blasting a stiff bet at Doyle. 8 grand. Is this action too serious for easygoing Doyle? Or has Doyle been luring Chow in with a laid-back approach? With ice in his veins, Doyle fires back 12,000, a 4 grand raise. Does Doyle have the cards, or is he bluffing? We'll never know. Chow blinks and folds. The old master wins again, this time about $50,000.
See, you could have had the profit.
It's no accident that Doyle and his friends are playing poker out west. Professionals have been playing poker in the West since the 1850s, when thousands of gamblers headed to California during the gold rush.
A lot of it was people who hadn't done so well in the East. They came out west to start over.
The Old West had 3 major vices that followed the Boones wherever they were, and that was whiskey, gambling, and prostitution. And often they were all offered in the same facility, which you might call a multiplex of sin.
The Old West was nothing less than a gambler's circuit. The best players moved from state to state, always on the hunt for a hot town, where mines were paying big, or where cattle was sold off at the railhead.
Wherever the money centered, that's where they tended to go.
Poker wasn't just a hobby to cowboy legends like Wyatt Earp and Wild Bill Hickok. Earp and Hickok were actually professional poker players who, out of necessity, learned to be quick with a gun.
Wild Bill Hickok was in a poker game, and apparently he felt he was being cheated. And when the hand was over, he called the bet. When he was shown the hand, which was better than his hand, he didn't do anything. And his opponent said to him, "What is your hand?" And Hickok pulled out his 2 guns like this, and he said, "I have a pair of 6s." And of course, he took all the money.
In fact, it was during a poker game that Hickok met the